Pittsburgh has a flaky ideology of violence. It's, when you look at, you have to study what's happening from the point of view of military anthropology, which isn't really very easy for me. I was a skittish, harmless, easily picked on waif who wasn't going to hurt anybody. And they came up with this flaky idea of having this girl who was a Jewish virgin taunting me with great intimacy to provoke ideations of conquest after a childhood of being battered, when I had ideations of fighting back that I could never bring myself to make good on because the thought of hurting somebody else bothered me more than being hurt. I remember reading Dexter King when he saw his father and lying in state. How can anybody do that to someone else? It was exactly what went through my mind when I was pummeled by a strange man in the face and landed on my back on Beatty Street, the Beatty Street gang. And they had this flaky idea, and they nuanced it by putting on these programs from the drama club to make me get the idea of what they were driving at. And then they used that for military anthropology. Now, the military anthropologists involved are psychotic rapists. You know, the stories that come out of things that, they're the stories of combat rape, of hostages, basically, children that they come across, are why we're used to go around in Vietnam and are now going around about Iraq. And it's clear why government wanted censorship of these things. But UW Dialectical and Pitt have authorized this idea that it was legitimate sexual anthropological research. And they try to avoid talking about the fact that it began when I was kidnapped and tortured as a child, and what the NAACP cannibalistically calls a provincial norm in Pittsburgh. So it doesn't make any sense. I mean, one of the things that these heavyweights do, like when I got Parkinson's, they brought in this guy named Parker because the Pittsburgh police gang and corrections working with Wadmaker, singularly after my reputation and working the military anthropology scene in Allegheny County, were named Parker. So, and they've been around since I was kidnapped and tortured as a child. The Ford brothers, police officers' families. I was constantly trying to get help from the police officers who worked with the police officers who were sending their children out to kidnap and torture me. It's sort of, the whole thing is rigged. In other words, to be preposterous, it's absurd theater. They have these, they put cocaine, and when I confirm it's cocaine, because I had tasted it when these kids forced me to, when I was crying and pleading with them not to, as a child, as a hostage child. And they're like, see, he knows what cocaine is. I mean, it's absurd theater. It was their cocaine. I wanted to make sure I had them on cocaine charges. They turned out to be the police. I mean, that, I'm sure, is a provincial norm of Allegheny County. And one of the things is Zionist zombies in police forces of old. Yesteryear, probably most of them retired now, that they probably have disciplic successors. Put on was they blew away some girl in Ohio. They said, see, that's the enzyme the queer ball was fighting. And she succumbed to it, so that legitimizes poisoning children and doing military anthropology research. La-di-da-di-da-di-da. It's not what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's when are they going to realize when are the outside observers going to realize they're watching an authoritarian, ludicrous bite its own arse? And then they say, oh, well, queer bait could have been dirty. We had to make sure. I mean, it's absurd theater. The people who release AIDS justify it. And I'm not allowed to find out what's going on. That's illegal. And there are various peculiar avenues you could follow to get to the bottom of it. Why are so many of the rivals involved? Like poisoning people and then saying that it proves they're criminals was something. Larry Gelomini used to talk about putting a rope on the fire alarm when you made a false fire alarm because there was a special substance that they could shine a flashlight on and prove that you had pulled the fire alarm. And he put out a $20 bill for Colucci to steal and say, you stole a $20 bill because I put it there to see you steal it. Gelomini punched me in the stomach. He wanted to be the first one to punch me when I showed up at his school. And these are the sort of tacticians that, like they had this guy named Carr. Shh, keep quiet, Jimmy. Don't tell anybody you've been kidnapped in a stolen car. Shh, Carr, shh, Jimmy. And there was a spree of deranged mentalities. What they do is they put together a program of hypnoanalysis. I mean, you're not allowed. The fact that they snipering children for fun all over the Middle East shows you what sort of party this is that's operating in America. And like this guy gets stabbed. He's in corrections. Whose side are you on? The corrections? Or are you on the side of the prisoners? Well, the prison colonies are evidently bursting at the seams from the military-industrial complex. And they form these gangs or these unions of special thinking. Like if you look at why certain people don't care about other certain people, you would, I put aside the fact that the Palestinian intellectuals are clearly concerned, were in on what was going on in the 80s with the fundamentalist tripartite. The thinning, I used to call it, cutting down the spread of the AIDS virus. And they rigged my home computer to say I could have saved them instead of could have saved John Lennon. The accusation has always been could have saved John Lennon, not could have saved them. So somebody sits around and puts together this idea that Jimmy Carrey, when he received letters, could have sounded the alarm that Gail Burstyn was planning an AIDS attack. Well, when did they get this idea? According to their folklore storyline, very early in the AIDS attack, when they announced the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Meaning making the money from this in a collection plate won't cover the losses anyway. So we support the people who did it because there's not enough to go around. So meaning I would have had to understand that John Lennon was Gail Burstyn because that's how it would have had to be stopped. And so here's me. I go to my dad. Gail Burstyn is John Lennon. He's going to pretend to be killed if we don't stop him, and they're planning an AIDS attack. Now, according to some accounts, my father would have said, give me them letters and said, don't ever tell anybody about this. Ha, 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 Jimmy had a nightmare. Jimmy had a nightmare. Now, let's say my father gets on the phone with Eisenhower and Ted Kennedy and puts a stop to it. If that's a plausible scenario, that means it could have been stopped. That means it happened. Oh, Did it happen? Why didn't somebody arrest her immediately and warn everybody when they claimed they knew this? See, so it's a sleight of hand. The likelihood that I would have been able to find somebody who wasn't in on how I was being used is relatively small. And in fact, a lot of the evidence that I have that it happened derives not from the Lenin letters, but from the program on Mount Desert Island in the 1980s, which took a while to get to the root of and get evidence about. And the people who they are claiming would have had to be alerted to save them were behind that operation. And they were the ones who were protecting Gail Burstyn to this very late date. I mean, we're talking about 1984, 40 years ago. They had an opportunity to intercept and warn. They call it an intercept. Why didn't they intercept? Because they were involved in it. I would have been talking to the people who did it no matter where I turned. It was a Rosemary's Baby operation, which was filmed at the Dakota. So what they do is, why don't black intellectuals at UW care about the sniping of children at places like Khan Yunis in Gaza? Well, I can explain that. Why should they? Because top secretly, they're working around the clock, double time at McDonald's to donate to the Congo and Sudan. You can believe that. So why don't the gays care about the Palestinians? Well, the gays do care about Palestinians now that they've built enough momentum to get Gaza destroyed. Why are they building momentum to get Gaza destroyed? Because Queerball could have saved John Lennon. Oh, I see. Thank you for explaining.